What does the death of Jordan Neely, the troubled homeless man who died by a chokehold in a New York City subway, say about America? Here's Rick Smith with more on that.
It's one of these moments where a headline catches your attention and you go, "That's how you write a headline." Yeah, it caught your attention, but it wasn't factually inaccurate. We saw some photos and the stories coming out of New York of the homeless guy who was choked to death, as passengers feared. We don't have all the details, and I don't know that we're going to anytime soon. But the headline was that grabbed my attention. Nobody cares about homeless people until they die, and I'm going, that is the right frame. And I would argue, I would have added to that, and even then, I doubt very few people really care because we don't seem to be doing much about it. Now, they went into the story of this Jordan Neely, the guy who was killed. And, look, I mean, another story of someone whose life was broken. His mother was murdered by her boyfriend when he was 14. Didn't finish school, got into some trouble, had some drug problems. Just a life of one obstacle, one bit of chaos after another, and no stability. And again, one of these things of no family structure that I wish everyone had. The kind of family structure that would be supportive. Unfortunately, this guy didn't. And this is where I come back to society has to play a role in this. They point out that it's been reported he was arrested some 42 times, mostly for nonsense. I mean, this is one of those things. Oh, he was arrested 42 times. He's got a rap sheet down the. Yeah, he got arrested for vagrancy, probably for loitering, for panhandling, just nonsense. And instead of having a system that said, hey, we're going to deal with this, we had a system that just kept pushing him around. For instance, evidently he hit an old lady. I guess it was in 2021. He was arrested again. He then had a judge said, hey, we're gonna put you into rehab, get you some help. Don't use drugs for 15 months and you'll be okay. Well, evidently he left the place after 2 weeks. System that did not follow up. And as the article says, very few people cared about this guy until he was killed. And now politically it's become, which camp are you in? Are you in the red hats or the blue hats? Do you got the R or the D? Are you a conservative or a liberal? We've got our sides without actually talking about the issue itself. And as I said from the beginning, and this was my hot take gut reaction. People in desperate situations do desperate things. And if there's a lack of humane solutions, inhumane solutions will fill the void. And that's what we've seen here. We saw people who were afraid of this guy because he was acting erratically. He was causing a disruption. And the only people who would interact with him were going to do it in all of the wrong ways. The person who got behind him and started and choked him to death, I'm sure, as his lawyer says, he didn't mean to cause any harm. But he was put in that situation where that's the choice he made. And what it is, and this is what's frustrating to me. We have a system that now wants to deal with this individual thing without looking at the much bigger picture. I look at, to my point of, each side wanting their thing. Jesse Waters over at the Fox place. He tweeted out, white liberals sentenced Jordan Neely to death on the streets, and now they're using him as a talking point. Does this feed the outrage machine? Does this make people on the right, on the extreme, go, yeah, those white, it's their fault? It's crazy to me, especially when you look at the fact that people like Jesse Waters and his ilk have done great harm over the last 40, 50 years in destroying what little social safety net that could have helped this guy. Years ago, we used to, when I had more time, and I regret not being able to do this anymore, but when we used to do these Hungry and Homeless for the holiday events, where we'd live in a parking lot of a supermarket for 10 days, and a local trucking company would lend us a trailer, and we would fill up the trailer with food and give it to the food bank, and we'd raise money for the homeless shelter, and raise awareness to the issue, and talk about it in a way that we hoped would be constructive, and in a way that we hoped would help lead to solutions and not leave that void. Because again, the lack of humane solutions leads to inhumane outcomes. And I remember going in, honestly, with all of the same stereotypical views of people who were homeless. Mostly just people who made bad choices, drug addicts, lazy people, things like that. And what I came away with, and this is when you expose yourself to different ideas, different kinds of situations, different people, you come away with very different points of view. What I came away with is the vast majority of the people we met, they were struggling with mental health problems. Because what we used to do is during the day, we would be there and people would drop off food and we'd interact with the customers coming in and out of the supermarket, and we would, do that stuff. But at night, when consumer traffic slowed down, we invited the homeless people to come out of the woods and out of the places where they were holed up, and we would feed them. The grocery store was nice enough to give us, as many hot dogs and hot dog buns as we wanted. So at night, that's what we would do. And we would provide a safe space for them to be for a short period of time. And I was fortunate enough to hear their stories. And the vast majority of them were because at the time, the state had closed down the state mental health hospitals and just dumped these people. They tried. I'm not gonna go as far as they just dumped them, but ultimately they just dumped them onto the streets because the resources to take care of them weren't there, and it rolled down onto the local police departments. So you go, the guy was arrested 42 times. Can you believe that? Yeah, these were the people that I was talking to who were going through the same problems. They didn't see police as their friend, as a helper. They saw the police as someone who was going to harass them, give them a hard time, push them somewhere else, let them be someone else's problem. And what you ended up with are people who were in the shadows, exploitable, abusable, and really desperate. And as I've said before, when there's desperation, when people feel desperate, they will do desperate things. And I remember at the time, I came out and I said, look, I believe this has a lot to do with the closures of the state hospital, the cutting of social safety net funding. Now, this is going back into the early 2000s. And I got a call from the governor's office, a Democrat. No, Rick, you're wrong. It's not the state hospitals. It's not the cuts in funding. We're doing all these wonderful things. For these folks, we're doing this wonderful stuff. And the Republican mayor called me, said, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. We're doing all these wonderful things. And I got this thought in my head, if both of them are calling me, if both of them are telling me, no, you're wrong, it can't possibly be, it made me go, I'm right. Because it was bipartisan that, no, we wouldn't do that. And yet, as we've cut these social safety net programs, as we've cut this help, what we've done is we've created more desperation. And I think back to one guy in particular that we met along the way. Because, look, it can happen to any of us. This was the other thing I came away with. That no matter where you are, what station in life you're at, any bad things can happen. And the reason that I believe so wholeheartedly in having a social safety net that's strong enough to help people in their hour of need is because of Joe. I met Joe, a Vietnam vet, lifelong conservative Republican, never missed a day of work, never collected unemployment, never needed anything from anyone until he got sick, had a heart attack. And the job that he was working at, shuffling railroad engineers around, driving them from one place to another in a van, they had crummy health care. And, he was in the hospital with this heart attack. The bills are piling up. And he ends up not having income coming in because guess what? No paid sick leave. So he burns through his savings in no time whatsoever. And his landlord throws him out while he's still in the hospital, while he's still on the mend. Moves all of his stuff out onto the curb. And there's no one to stand up for Joe. No one to advocate for him. No state policies at the time. None of that stuff to help him. So and now he gets to the point where, hey, you can't go back to the job because you've been gone too long. You're out of luck. Now he's homeless. He's unemployable. And he's sick. The state picked up his health care bill because that's what we do through Medicaid. And good on us for doing that. We spent a couple $100,000 to keep Joe alive. And then we kicked him to the street, which is where we found Joe. Because one of the things that we did is when we would do these events, we would go and we'd get a bunch of cardboard boxes, a bunch of refrigerator boxes, and line them up under the trailer. And we would rent them out to people so that they could pretend to be homeless for a night. And for $20, you could play homeless on our Skid Row. And we would donate that money to the homeless shelter. And we gave one of the boxes to Joe. And as he said, the 10 days we were out in that parking lot were the safest that he had felt in months. Because he was sick, he was weak, and he was broke. And there was no help for him. And the help that we could get him took a long time to do. Now, when it ended, we ended up renting a hotel room for him for a bit until he could get into a VA center on the other side of the state. And then a couple of months later, he passed. But this is one of those moments where you start going, it could happen to you. It could happen to me. And I know we're told we're this grand religious nation. How could we allow that to happen? I couple that with the fact that there was a Bloomberg report out. An LA Times report out that said life expectancy in the U.S. has declined. And, they go through the reality. It has a lot to do with the fact that, guess what? Policy matters. Inequality matters. The place that has the lowest life expectancy in this country is not a surprise or should be a surprise to no one. It's the southeastern U.S. It's Alabama, it's Mississippi, it's Louisiana, it's Arkansas, it's those states, Tennessee, it's all of the Georgia, it's those states. And not by a little bit, by a lot. And you go, well, it's just the South. Now, the pandemic had an awful lot to do with it. According to the CDC, COVID explains about half of the decline in life expectancy. But you have heart disease, you have chronic liver disease, you've got cirrhosis, you've got suicide, you've got opioid addiction, you've got all of these other problems. And policy tends to be what drives this. The states that have the lowest life expectancy, surprise, surprise. Many of them, eight of the 12 at the bottom, have not passed the Affordable Care Act, have not expanded Medicaid in their states. So are you surprised that people who aren't getting care are dying younger? No. So the question becomes, how do we as a civil society take crisis and take horrible situations like the death of this man and not use it for political fodder, but actually use it as a moment to go, a moment of self-reflection.